Mara Vale had learned to sleep with one hand beneath her pillow and her boots pointed toward the door. It was not fear, she told herself. It was preparation. Fear belonged to people who expected someone else to save them. Mara had stopped expecting that a long time ago. The rented room above the trading post was small, cold, and temporary, but the lock belonged to her. So did the coins hidden beneath a loose floorboard, the worn leather travel bag beside the bed, and every decision she made after sunrise. Then the border closed. By noon, rumors had become fact. 2 settlements farther north had been attacked. Armed patrols were turning travelers back, and lone omegas moving between territories had become easy targets for anyone willing to ignore pack law. Mara stood at the trading post counter while the owner avoided her eyes. "You need Alpha sponsorship now," he said. "Recognize protection, or nobody reputable will take you through. I can pay. That isn't the problem." It always became the problem eventually. Not money, not distance. What she was. Omega. Unclaimed. Rejected. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. Once, another Alpha had called control protection too. He had chosen where she went, who she spoke to, when she should be grateful. Whenever Mara resisted, he reminded her that a good mate trusted the stronger wolf to decide. Then he abandoned her and made sure she believed the failure had been hers. Mara pushed the memory down. "Who can sponsor me?" The owner hesitated. That was enough to make her uneasy. "There is one ruler whose territory still touches the eastern route. Name: Kael Draven." Silence seemed to spread around them. Mara had heard the stories. Everyone had. The Alpha who ended rebellions without mercy. The ruler whose soldiers obeyed before he finished speaking. The man enemies called the demon, and allies rarely contradicted twice. The owner leaned closer. "Find another way." "There isn't one. There is always another way." Mara almost laughed. People said that when they were not the ones trapped. By sunset, she was walking toward the black stone stronghold rising above the valley, every instinct warning her to turn. Around, guards watched from the walls. No one stopped her until she reached the gates. A broad-shouldered warrior stepped forward. "State your business." Mara could still leave. She touched the emergency coins hidden inside her coat, then looked past him toward the fortress of the most feared Alpha in the region. "My name is Mara Vale," she said. Her voice stayed steady. "Tell Kael Draven I came to make a deal." The guard studied Mara for several seconds before stepping aside. "Wait here." The gates remained closed behind him. Mara did not move closer. She stood with her leather bag against her leg and counted the distance back to the road until the warrior returned. "The Alpha will see you." Inside, Kael Draven's stronghold was quieter than she expected. No prisoners screaming beneath the floors. No wolves prowling corridors with blood on their hands. Just stone, disciplined guards, and people who became noticeably more careful whenever Kael's name was spoken. Mara was taken to a council chamber where a single man waited beside a long table covered with border maps. She knew immediately who he was. Kael was taller than she had imagined, broad through the shoulders, dressed in dark practical clothing rather than ceremonial finery. Nothing about him needed decoration to announce power. He looked at her once, slowly, and Mara's body remembered every Alpha who had ever expected her to lower her eyes. She didn't. "Mara Vale." His voice was quiet. "You asked for a deal. I need protected passage through the Eastern Territory. The Eastern route is unstable." I noticed. Something almost changed in his expression. Not amusement exactly. "And what are you offering?" Mara approached the table but stopped with several feet between them. She pointed toward the border map. "Those patrol marks are wrong." Kael's gaze shifted to the map. "Explain." "I traveled through 2 of those settlements before the attack started. The pressure isn't coming only from armed patrols. Someone has been moving through civilian routes, asking who supplies whom, which families shelter travelers, which roads are used after dark." His attention sharpened. "You saw them?" "I saw enough to recognize the pattern. And you waited until now to tell someone?" The question sounded harder than the others. Mara's spine stiffened. "I didn't realize I was required to report my movements to you." Kael went still. The air itself seemed heavier. Mara knew what an Alpha could do with that silence. She had lived beneath one who used dominance whenever argument failed. Her pulse accelerated despite her determination not to show it. Kael noticed. Then, deliberately, he stepped backward. "You aren't." The pressure vanished with the distance. Mara stared at him. I need those routes, he continued. You need passage. You help me identify what you saw and where. When the work is finished, I provide an escort through my territory. That's not enough. One of his eyebrows lifted. No, I want the terms written. Kael pulled a blank sheet of parchment toward him. Then write them. That stopped her. You're letting me set the conditions? You came proposing the bargain. Mara placed both palms against the table. You don't command me. Not with alpha authority. Not because I'm under your roof, and not because you decide something is for my own good. Kael's hand stopped over the parchment. For the first time, something unmistakably personal crossed his face. It disappeared too quickly for Mara to name. Agreed. I owe you information relevant to the border situation. Nothing else. Agreed. No physical claim. No mating expectation. No permanent allegiance. His gaze held hers. Agreed. And when my obligation is finished, I leave. A longer silence followed. Yes. Mara watched while he wrote every condition instead of softening them into language that could later mean something else. He added his own responsibilities, food, shelter, physical protection while she remained in his territory, and safe passage when their work ended. When he finished, he turned the parchment toward her. Read it. Mara did. Twice. Kael waited without impatience. There were no hidden clauses she could find. No declaration that an Omega under an Alpha's protection became his property. No convenient exception allowing him to decide when her freedom became dangerous. Why? She asked. Why what? Why agree to all of this? Because you have information I need. You could order me to give it to you. Kael's expression hardened, but not at her. I could. Mara waited. He offered nothing more. That answer unsettled her more than denial would have. She took the pen. Her fingers hovered above the parchment. Every lesson she had learned told her never to put her freedom into another Alpha's hands. Yet the roads behind her were closing, and this time the terms were visible. This time she had written them herself. Mara signed. Kael added his name beneath hers. Then we have a deal. The words should have sounded threatening from the man everyone called the demon. Instead, they sounded like a promise he expected himself to keep. A guard escorted Mara upstairs. Her room was simple but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and one heavy wooden door. Mara immediately tested the handle. Unlocked. The guard placed a small iron key in her palm. His order, he said. There is no second key. Mara looked down at it. Somewhere below, she had just bound herself by contract to the most feared Alpha she had ever met. Yet for the first time since entering his stronghold, the thing in her hand was not proof that Kael Draven could keep her inside. It was proof that he had given her the power to keep everyone else out. By morning, Mara had tested the lock 3 times. Each time, the small iron key turned cleanly beneath her fingers. No one entered without knocking. No one asked her to surrender the key. It should not have mattered as much as it did. She tucked it into her coat before carrying her leather bag downstairs. Kael was already in the council chamber, standing over the same maps they had studied the night before. 2 guards waited near the wall. Mara stopped in the doorway. Kael looked up. Come in. Her shoulders tightened before she could stop them. The words had been ordinary, not weighted with Alpha authority, but her body reacted before reason caught up. Kael's eyes flicked briefly toward her hands. If you want it, he added. Mara disliked that he had noticed. She disliked even more that he had corrected himself without making her explain. She crossed to the table. For the next several hours, they worked through the eastern routes. Mara marked villages where strangers had questioned merchants, narrow roads used by families avoiding military patrols, and 2 crossings absent from Kael's reports. He listened without interrupting unless he needed clarification. Your scouts missed this one, she said, tapping a path beside a river. It looks useless during daylight. After dark, traders use it to avoid the main road. Kael studied the map. How do you know? Because people traveling alone learn roads soldiers don't. His gaze rose to hers, but he did not ask what being alone had cost her. Instead, he moved a marker. Then my scouts learn it now. Mara expected argument. She received correction. It was becoming irritatingly difficult to fit him inside the monster she had prepared herself to meet. That afternoon, the difficulty became worse. 3 officers entered to discuss patrol deployment. The oldest of them barely acknowledged Mara. The Omega can wait outside. The Omega has a name, Mara said. His eyes narrowed. You're under Alpha Draven's protection. You'll speak when permitted. Dominance entered his voice. Mara's lungs locked. The council chamber disappeared for half a heartbeat beneath an older room. Another alpha, another command presented as concern. Her fingers closed around the edge of the table. Kael moved before she could force herself to answer. Stop. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The officer went rigid. Kael stepped between them, but he did not touch Mara. You will not use dominance on anyone working under my protection without immediate cause. My alpha, I only meant, I know what you meant. The officer lowered his head. Kael dismissed him from the meeting, then returned to the map. He did not ask Mara whether she was frightened. He did not tell her she should be grateful. Most importantly, he did not answer for her when another officer cautiously asked about the river crossing. Mara answered herself. Later, walking through the lower courtyard, she saw the other side of Kael Draven. A soldier reported that a patrol had ignored an evacuation order to pursue. Suspected raiders. Kael's expression became terrifyingly empty. Remove the commander from duty. Every family still exposed because of that decision gets moved before nightfall. If one person is left behind because someone wanted glory, I will know whose name belongs beside theirs. The soldier departed almost at a run. Mara understood then why people feared disappointing him. There was steel in Kael that had nothing gentle about it. Yet an hour later, she found him checking supply lists for displaced families himself, questioning whether blankets and food had actually reached them instead of accepting the report placed before him. No audience watched. No one praised him. When an officer suggested announcing the relief effort to counter rumors about him, Kael said, "Feed them. I don't care whether they like me while eating." That night, Mara heard two older soldiers talking near the stairwell. One mentioned the battle that had earned Kael his name. The other immediately went silent. Not reverent. Not angry. Uncomfortable. When they noticed Mara, both walked away. She carried that reaction back to her room. The demon was real enough to frighten his own soldiers, yet the story surrounding him had edges that refused to fit together. 2 days later, Kael spread a new map across the council table. I'm inspecting the eastern settlements. Mara traced the route with one finger. It crossed directly through the places she had described. Take someone who knows those roads. I am. He indicated a scout waiting outside. Mara should have felt relieved. Remaining behind was safer. It also meant trusting someone else to interpret details she had seen herself. He doesn't know them the way I do. Kael's jaw tightened. The border is dangerous. That wasn't my question. You didn't ask one. Mara looked at the route again. Every old instinct told her never to walk voluntarily into danger beside an alpha powerful enough to control every decision once they left these walls. But Kael had already been given opportunities to take choices from her. So far, he had returned every one. Mara lifted her gaze. I'm coming with you. Kael studied her for a long moment. Your contract doesn't require it. I know. That was precisely why she could say it. I'm still coming. Kael did not try to change her mind. By sunrise, Mara was riding east with him and a small escort, following the narrow road she had marked on his maps. The farther they traveled from the stronghold, the more often she caught herself measuring distance, between riders, between trees, between herself and the nearest path away. Kael never commented. At midday, one of the guards spotted movement beyond a ridge and barked an order to another soldier. The alpha weight in his voice was not even directed at Mara, but her body reacted anyway. Her hands tightened around the reins. Her breathing shortened. For one terrible instant, the road beneath her became somewhere else, and she could almost hear her former mate telling her to stop arguing because he knew what was best. Mara. Kael's voice came from several feet away. No command, just her name. She focused on him. He had stopped his horse without approaching. We're continuing when you're ready. She hated the embarrassment burning beneath her skin. I'm fine. Kael gave a single nod. Then we continue. Nothing more was said. But afterward, Mara noticed something change. Kael began giving the guards information instead of sharp orders whenever she rode near him. When instructions were necessary, he sent them quietly through the scout. He never explained the adjustment or looked at Mara as though expecting gratitude. That made it harder to dismiss as performance. By evening, they reached an isolated shelter used by travelers near the eastern settlements. Mara helped compare what she remembered with what Kael's scouts had recorded. A supply wagon had changed direction. 2 families had left without telling neighbors where they were going. Kael showed her every report instead of deciding which details she needed to know. You think these disappearances are connected? She asked. I think assuming they aren't would be convenient. He handed her another page. You know these people better than I do. Tell me what I'm missing. Mara stared at him before taking it. Her former mate had asked for her opinion too, sometimes. Usually. After he had already made the decision. Kael waited. They're frightened of someone, she said finally. But not enough to abandon everything immediately. Someone is giving them a reason to leave quietly. Kael considered that rather than replacing it with his own answer. Then tomorrow we look for the reason. That night Mara woke to a sound from the adjoining room. She reached automatically for the knife she kept beside her travel bag, then heard a chair scrape hard across stone. Kael. His door stood partly open. Through it she saw him sitting on the edge of a narrow bed, shoulders rigid, one hand gripping his forearm as if anchoring himself. His breathing was ragged. Sweat darkened his shirt. For a moment, the feared alpha looked less like a demon than a man fighting something no one else could see. Mara stepped closer. Kael's head snapped toward her. The warning in his eyes stopped her immediately. She knew that look. Not aggression. Exposure. She could have asked what he had dreamed. She could have crossed the room and told herself comfort justified ignoring the boundary he had just drawn without words. Instead, Mara filled a cup from the water pitcher, placed it inside the doorway, and sat against the opposite wall of the corridor. Far enough away that he could leave. Close enough that he would not be alone unless he chose to be. Neither spoke. Eventually his breathing steadied. You don't have to stay, he said. I know. Mara remained. In the morning, he did not mention the night. Neither did she. They resumed their inspection, but something between them had shifted. Later, when the trail narrowed beside a steep muddy slope, Mara stopped. Crossing alone was possible. She could struggle through it rather than owe anyone assistance. Kael was already on the other side. He looked back, but did not offer his hand. He waited. Mara stared at the mud, then at him. Asking should not have felt dangerous. Help me across. Kael returned immediately. He held out his hand without closing the remaining distance. Mara took it. His grip was firm, warm, and gone the moment she reached stable ground. No debt followed. No claim. That evening, as Kael rolled up his sleeves. Over another map, Mara noticed pale scars crossing his forearm and disappearing beneath the fabric. Old, deep, unmistakable. She remembered the stories of the battle that had made him the demon. Stories in which Kael Draven had supposedly sent others to die while remaining untouched behind his defenses. She looked away before he noticed her staring. The stories were wrong about something. She still did not know what. But when Kael entered the shelter later that night, Mara realized several minutes had passed before another truth reached her. She had not checked where the nearest exit was. The next morning, they followed the eastern trail toward the last settlement Mara had marked on Kael's map. The road narrowed between wooded slopes, forcing the escort into a single line. Mara rode near Kael without thinking about it, until a sharp crack sounded somewhere ahead. His horse jerked sideways. Mara's mount reared, throwing her weight backward. She caught the saddle, but lost one stirrup as loose earth slid beneath the animal's hooves. Mara. Kael was beside her almost immediately, but he did not grab her. Can you dismount? She nodded, forcing air into her lungs. Another section of earth collapsed across the road behind them, separating them from the escort in a cloud of dust and broken branches. No attack followed. No enemy appeared. Just an unstable trail and the sudden realization that the safest route back was blocked. Kael examined the slope. There's an old shelter farther east. We wait there until the scouts find another way around. Mara hated how quickly her heart was beating. You're asking? His gaze met hers. Yes. She looked at the damaged road, then nodded. Then we go. They reached the shelter before rain began. It was smaller than the previous one, barely more than 4 stone walls and a roof, with enough space for 2 people to sit without pretending they were not alone. Kael remained near the doorway while Mara took the opposite side. For a while, rain filled the silence. You always do that, she said. Do what? Leave me an exit. Kael glanced toward the open doorway. You prefer one. Mara pulled her knees closer. Most alphas would call that weakness. Most alphas aren't here. She almost smiled, but the answer struck somewhere too tender. My former mate used to say he was protecting me. Kael became still. Mara had never intended to tell him. Perhaps it was the rain, or the road behind them being temporarily gone, or the fact that Kael had spent days proving he could stand close without closing a cage. At first it was little things, she continued. Which roads were safe? Which people were bad influences? Where I should work? He always had a reason. And if I disagreed, he said I didn't understand the dangers the way he did. Kael said nothing. Eventually, I stopped knowing whether my decisions were mine. When I finally refused him, he left. Then he made sure everyone understood that I had driven away the alpha willing to tolerate me. She swallowed. The worst part wasn't being rejected. It was wondering if he was right. If I really couldn't survive without someone deciding everything for me. Kael's jaw tightened. Mara braced for reassurance, for some promise that he would never hurt her. Instead, he looked toward the rain. Then you were right to make me sign the contract. She stared at him. That's all. What else should I say? I don't know. I could tell you he was wrong. But you survived him before I knew your name. You don't need me to certify that. Something inside her loosened painfully. People call you a monster, she whispered. Kael's expression changed. They call me the demon. Are they wrong? Silence stretched between them. Not entirely. Mara waited. Kael pulled back one sleeve, exposing the pale scars she had noticed before. Years ago, there was a pack crisis. I gave an order. People died because of it. No excuse followed. How many? She asked. His eyes hardened with remembered pain. Enough. Why did you give it? That is not a story I can give you tonight. Mara could have pushed. Instead, she recognized the boundary for what it was because he had respected hers often enough for her to recognize his. All right. Kael looked almost surprised. Thunder rolled beyond the shelter. For the first time, Mara understood that his silence might not always be secrecy. Sometimes it was the only wall he knew how to build. You really think you're dangerous? She said. I know what I'm capable of. So do I. His gaze snapped toward her. Mara's heart beat harder, but she did not look away. I've watched you. She moved from her side of the shelter and sat closer, leaving space between them. You could have commanded me the first night. You didn't. You could have decided what information I was allowed to see. You didn't. You could have touched me every time you thought I needed help. She glanced toward his scarred arm. You waited. Mara. Her name sounded like a warning directed at himself. I'm not saying the past doesn't matter. Good. I'm saying I know what you've done since I met you. Neither moved. The distance between them suddenly felt deliberate. Kael could have crossed it effortlessly. He did not. Mara realized he was waiting for the same thing he had waited for beside the muddy slope. Her choice. She reached across the space and placed her hand over his. Kael inhaled sharply. His fingers remained motionless until Mara curled hers around them. Only then did he turn his palm beneath hers. No claim. No alpha demand. Just warmth. Mara leaned toward him and rested her forehead briefly against his. The closeness frightened her precisely because she wanted it. When she pulled back, Kael let her go immediately. By morning, the rain had stopped. Their escort found them shortly after sunrise with news from the stronghold. One of Kael's scouts handed him a sealed report. Mara watched his face harden as he read it. What happened? Kael passed the report to her instead of summarizing it. Several movements along the eastern border had been traced through contacts connected to Mara's former pack. Someone who knew the roads she had traveled was helping the faction destabilizing Kael's territory. Mara read the final line twice. The danger she had thought belonged to Kael's world had just reached directly into her own past. They returned to the stronghold before nightfall, carrying the report with them. Mara spent most of the ride turning its implications over in her mind. Someone connected to her former pack knew enough about her movements to recognize the routes she favored. Whether they were using that knowledge because of her, or because it happened to serve the border operation, she could not yet tell. Kael did not speculate aloud. That should have reassured her. Instead, the silence between them felt different from the one they had shared in the shelter. By the time they reached the council chamber, more reports were waiting. Kael read them standing, his expression becoming colder with every page. Mara remained beside the map. Show me. He hesitated. It was brief, but she saw it. Kael. He handed her the reports. Several settlements had received warnings not to cooperate with his patrols. Others had been told the demon was preparing to seize civilians and punish anyone who resisted. Beneath those claims were older accusations, repeated with careful precision. Kael Draven had once sacrificed his own people. He would do it again. Mara looked toward him. They're using the battle against you. They have been for years. And now they're connecting it to what's happening here. Yes. He moved another marker across the map, which means the border pressure is political as well as territorial. Mara noticed 3 guards stationed outside the chamber instead of 1. Why are there more guards? Kael did not answer immediately. A message intercepted this afternoon mentioned you. Cold moved through her. What did it say? Enough to make clear that your connection to me has been noticed. Connection? Your work here. His voice was controlled, but something underneath it had tightened. You may be useful leverage. Mara set the report down. Then tell me what changes. Your security. What does that mean? You remain inside the stronghold until I know who is behind this. The words struck harder than they should have. That wasn't what I asked. It is the answer. Mara stared at him. Days earlier, he would have explained the danger and let her decide how to respond. Now he was already moving markers, already constructing the solution around her. My contract says I leave when my work is finished. Your work isn't finished. Then I decide whether I continue it. Kael's gaze lifted. Someone may be targeting you because of me. And that gives you more information to give me, not more authority over me. His jaw flexed. Mara, this is not theoretical. Neither is the contract. He looked away first. We'll discuss it when I know more. The dismissal chilled her more than anger would have. Later that evening, another document arrived. This one was not an official report, but a copied message circulated among the eastern settlements. Mara read it alone in her room. It claimed Kael had deliberately recruited a rejected Omega because her knowledge of civilian roads made her disposable. Once she had served her purpose, the demon would never allow someone carrying knowledge of his defenses to walk away. Mara knew propaganda when she saw it. She also knew why this particular lie had been chosen. Because it sounded like something she had heard before. I know what is safest for you. You don't understand what could happen without me. Trust me. Her former mate's voice seemed to rise from the page. She folded the message and forced herself to breathe. Kael was not him. Kael had given her the key to her own room. He had written her boundaries into their agreement. He had waited for her choices again and again. But downstairs, guards had multiplied without anyone asking her. The next morning, she found Kael in the council chamber after what looked like another sleepless night. I want to leave the stronghold today. His head came up sharply. No, one word. Immediate. Mara felt something inside her close. I wasn't asking permission. Then you have your answer anyway. You promised me safe passage. When our agreement was fulfilled. And if I decide I'm done helping you? Kael went very still. Then I would normally honor that. Normally. Mara heard the exception before he spoke it. But not now. Not while someone may be waiting for you outside these walls. So the contract protects my freedom until you become afraid for me? His face hardened. This is not about fear. Then what is it about? Keeping you alive. There it was. Protection, transformed into decision. Mara stepped backward before she realized she was doing it. Kael noticed. Pain flashed across his face, quickly buried beneath control. I need time, he said, to identify the threat. And during that time, you stay here. Mara returned to her room without answering. The iron key felt heavier in her pocket now. She took out her leather travel bag and began checking the few belongings inside, not because she had decided to run, but because old habits had awakened. Money, clothes, the copied message, everything necessary to leave quickly. Near midday, she went downstairs to examine the original contract herself. One question mattered more than every rumor outside. Had Kael actually changed what she was permitted to do? The guard responsible for travel records avoided her eyes. That was answer enough. Mara demanded the authorization ledger. Her name appeared beneath a new restriction entered that morning. External departure suspended by order of Alpha Draven. She read it twice. Kael had not destroyed their contract. He had done something worse in its own way. He had convinced himself circumstances allowed him to step around it. Mara touched the room key inside her coat. Once, it had felt like proof that the demon understood the difference between protection and possession. Now she looked toward the council chamber where Kael was deciding how to keep her safe and understood the real danger between them. The man she had begun to trust was frightened of losing her. And when Kael Draven became frightened, he tried to control what he could. Mara found Kael in the council chamber exactly where she had expected him to be, standing over the border maps, as though enough planning could force every dangerous possibility into submission. The original contract lay folded in her hand. Kael looked up when she entered. His gaze dropped to the paper, then returned to her face. You suspended my authorization to leave. He did not deny it. Yes. Without telling me. I intended to. After you decided for me? Kael straightened. After I confirmed the threat. Mara placed the contract on the table between them. Read it. His expression tightened. I know what it says. Then read the part where you decide my freedom only matters when you believe. I'm safe. There is no such part. Exactly. Silence filled the chamber. Kael glanced toward the guards outside. Leave us. They withdrew and closed the doors. Mara heard the latch settle and immediately looked toward it. Kael saw that too. He crossed the room and opened the doors again before returning to the table. The gesture hurt more than she expected because it reminded her of the man she had trusted before fear began making his choices. Someone connected to your former pack is helping these people, he said. They know your routes. They know you're here. If you walk outside these walls now, I cannot guarantee your safety. Then tell me that. I just did. No. You told me after you had already taken away the decision. Kael's restraint cracked. Because I know what happens when a threat is underestimated. Mara went still. And that means you get to choose for me. It means I am not letting you walk into an ambush because you need to prove you're free. The words struck exactly where he should have known they would. You think that's what this is? I think you are angry enough to ignore the danger. And I think you're frightened enough to become the thing you promised you wouldn't be. Kael recoiled as if she had hit him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then his voice lowered. You're staying. Mara felt the room disappear around her. She was somewhere else again. Hearing another alpha explain why resistance proved she could not be trusted with her own life. She forced herself to remain where she was. Use the contract, she said. Kael frowned. What? My work for you ends now. I'm invoking the clause you signed. Release me and provide the passage you promised. Mara, you said when my obligation ended, I could leave. The situation has changed. My consent hasn't. Kael turned away, both hands braced against the table. If I release you and they kill you before you clear my territory, what exactly will your freedom have accomplished? It will have remained mine. He faced her again. That is not enough for me. The admission landed between them. Mara's anger faltered, but only for a heartbeat. Then this was never going to work. Kael's face went blank. Don't. You gave me a key because you understood what a locked door meant to me. You waited when I needed space. You let me choose when to come closer. Her voice shook now. And the moment caring about me became frightening. You decided all those choices were privileges you could suspend. I am trying to keep you alive. So was he. That was always what he called it. Kael froze. Mara saw the recognition arrive. She saw him remember the shelter, the rain, every word she had trusted him with. But fear still held him. I cannot release you into a known threat. Mara swallowed against the ache in her throat. Then I was wrong about you. She picked up the contract and turned toward the open doors. Mara. She stopped but did not look back. I won't use dominance on you. His voice sounded almost broken. You think that makes this different enough? Mara finally faced him. I'm already checking exits again. Kael's eyes moved instinctively toward the doorway. Something in him collapsed without any visible movement. Mara watched his gaze return to the contract in her hand, then to the key beneath the edge of her coat. When he spoke again, the authority was gone. Wait. Kael crossed to the travel ledger on the side table. He stared at the restriction carrying his own order for several seconds. Then he struck it through. Your authorization is restored. Mara could barely breathe. And the contract? Fulfilled. The word cost him. She could hear it. An escort will take you beyond the contested section if you accept one. If you don't, I will provide the safest route information we have. He paused. The choice is yours. Mara wanted relief. Instead, grief opened inside her. Kael had finally given her exactly what she demanded, and it hurt because some part of her had wanted him to become someone she would never need to leave. She returned to her room, packed the last of her belongings into the leather bag, took her emergency money, and placed the iron key on the table beside the door. Kael did not come to stop her. By afternoon, Mara was outside the stronghold with the contract in her bag and freedom restored beneath her feet. She had chosen the escorted route, not because Kael ordered it, but because accepting useful protection was not the same as surrendering choice. At the first safe stop beyond the inner road, a bundle of copied border records awaited review by travelers being questioned about the unrest. Mara almost ignored them. Then she recognized the location from Kael's maps. She opened the bundle. Beneath patrol notes and civilian statements was an older record attached as evidence against the demon, the battle everyone kept invoking. But this copy contained details the circulated accusations had omitted. Mara read the first lines, then stopped breathing. The story she had been told about Kael Draven was not the whole story. Mara read the record again, slower this time. Years earlier, the fighting had not begun as the clean rebellion described in the accusations circulating through the eastern settlements. An advancing hostile pack had driven civilians toward Kael's defensive line, deliberately trapping families between its fighters and the barrier protecting the populated territory beyond. Kael had been given minutes to choose. Hold the barrier, and the attackers would breach it with the civilians among them. Destroy the crossing, and everyone still stranded beyond it might die. The order recorded beneath Kael Draven's name was unmistakable. He had ordered the barrier destroyed. People had died because of that decision. Nothing in the document erased that. But the pages after it changed everything Mara thought she understood. Evacuation reports showed Kael had remained beyond the defensive line after issuing the order, helping move civilians while his soldiers prepared to destroy the crossing. The scars on his arm had not come from watching safely behind his defenses. He had nearly died with the people he had condemned. The final testimony was worse in a different way. Publicly exposing how civilians had been positioned and used would have implicated factions whose retaliation threatened survivors and risked restarting the conflict. Kael had accepted responsibility without publishing the full circumstances. The name Demon had followed. Mara closed her eyes. She could suddenly see the pattern running through him. The maps checked twice. The supply lists he inspected himself. The refusal to trust danger to probability. The terrible conviction that if he controlled every variable quickly enough, perhaps no choice would ever again end with people dying because he had hesitated or chosen wrong. It explained what he had done to her. It did not excuse it. Understanding a cage did not make the cage acceptable. But Mara understood something else too. Kael had finally opened it. He had released her while believing that doing so might get her killed. She looked toward the road leading away from his territory. Freedom was there. She could continue walking and never again risk discovering whether Kael could become the man who frightened her in that council chamber. Then a fresh rider reached the stop, carrying word that coordinated movement had begun along the eastern routes. The faction destabilizing Kael's territory was acting while his forces were divided. Mara knew those roads. More importantly, she knew what the records in her hands proved about the story being used to turn settlements against him. She could leave safely. Or she could return voluntarily to a dangerous situation and trust herself enough to know that choosing Kael was not the same as surrendering to him. Mara tightened the straps on her leather bag. I'm going back. The escort stared at her. Alpha Draven released you. I know. That was why returning mattered. By the time Mara reached the stronghold, preparations were already underway. Guards moved through the courtyard. Kael stood over the council table when she entered, but this time he did not tell anyone to stop her. He simply stared. Why are you here? Because I chose to be. Something raw crossed his face. Mara placed the old records beside the current maps. I know what happened. Kael looked down and understood immediately. Then you know why they call me the demon. I know you gave the order. His jaw tightened. Yes. And I know why. That doesn't make those people less dead. No, Mara stepped closer. And what happened to you doesn't make what you did to me acceptable either. His eyes closed briefly. I know. Good. Because I didn't come back to forgive everything. She opened the current border map. I came back because the people moving against you are using roads I know. And because these records prove they've built their support around a version of the past that leaves out what actually happened. Kael looked at her hand resting on the map. You don't owe me this. I'm not here because I owe you anything. That silenced him. Mara traced the routes she had traveled before reaching his stronghold. The pattern was visible now. Pressure on settlements, controlled movement through civilian paths, rumors timed to make Kael's patrols appear threatening. They want you to respond exactly the way everyone expects the demon to respond. More soldiers, more control, more frightened civilians. Kael followed her markings. Then we don't give them that response. Together, they identified the routes through which the faction's movements could be exposed and the records carried to the affected settlements. Mara pointed to the path she knew best. I can take this one. Kael's head snapped up. No, the word came instantly. Both of them froze. Mara watched the battle move across his face. Every instinct in him demanded control. She could almost see the old decisions standing behind his eyes, the belief that one wrong choice would become another list of dead people he carried forever. His hands curled against the table. Then slowly, deliberately, he opened them. "Tell me your plan." Mara did. Kael listened. He gave her the latest patrol positions, the known danger points, and every piece of information she needed to judge the risk herself. When she finished, he asked, "Do you understand what could happen?" "Yes." Pain tightened his face. "And you still choose it?" "Yes." Kael breathed once, deeply. "Then I trust your choice." That was the moment Mara knew they had changed. Not because fear had disappeared, because it had not. Kael was terrified. So was she. Yet neither used fear as permission to take the other's freedom. The operation moved quickly after that. Mara's knowledge exposed how the rival faction had been using civilian routes, while the older records broke the simple story they had relied upon to turn frightened settlements against Kael. With their movement exposed and their political leverage collapsing, the immediate attempt to destabilize his territory failed. When Mara returned to the stronghold, exhausted but unharmed, Kael was waiting in the courtyard. He took one step toward her and stopped. Mara understood the question. This time there was no contract requiring her presence, no locked authorization, no bargain left to fulfill. She crossed the remaining distance herself. Kael's arms closed around her only after hers had already gone around him. "I thought you might keep walking," he said against her hair. Mara held him tighter. "So did I." She pulled back enough to look at him. "Then I decided where I wanted to go." For the first time since Mara had entered Kael Draven's stronghold, there was no agreement determining what happened next. The immediate threat along the eastern border had collapsed once the rival factions' movements were exposed. Settlements that had been fed carefully edited stories now possessed the records needed to understand what had actually happened, both in the present conflict and years before. But truth did not transform Kael into a hero. Some families still remembered people who had died because of his order. Some soldiers still lowered their voices when they spoke about that day. Some people would always call him the demon. Kael did not ask them to stop. "They have the right to hate what I did," he told Mara when she found him alone in the council chambers several days later. "Knowing why I chose it doesn't require them to forgive me." Mara understood. Healing was not the same thing as erasing the wound. She knew that every morning when a sudden alpha command somewhere in the courtyard still made her shoulders tense. She knew it whenever she entered an unfamiliar room and automatically noticed the doors. Kael noticed too, but he no longer rearranged the world around her without asking. Sometimes he simply waited until she chose where to stand. The difference seemed small. To Mara, it was everything. On the table between them lay a new document. "What is that?" she asked. "An agreement." Mara raised an eyebrow. Kael almost looked embarrassed. "If you stay, I want you protected legally. Everything from the original contract remains. Your autonomy, your property, your right to leave. No claim without consent. I added provisions preventing anyone under my authority from overriding them." Mara read several lines, then looked at him. "You wrote me another contract. I thought you liked contracts." "I liked the first one because I didn't trust you." Kael went silent. Mara reached into her leather bag and removed the original parchment. Its folds had softened from being carried through too many roads. Her signature remained beside his. She placed it over the new agreement. "When I signed this, I needed passage through your territory. And I needed your knowledge." It was a transaction. Kael's expression became carefully unreadable. "If you want to leave, I won't stop you." Mara believed him now. That mattered more than any promise he could write. She unfolded the original contract and looked at the clauses she had once read twice before daring to sign. Then she gripped the parchment with both hands and tore it down the middle. Kael stared at the pieces. "Mara, I don't want another contract forcing either of us to stay." Something vulnerable entered his face. "Then what do you want?" Mara remembered standing outside his gates with emergency coins hidden inside her coat, convinced that survival meant bargaining with a monster. She remembered the room key in her palm, his hand waiting across the muddy slope. The night he let her sit beside his pain without demanding she fix it. She remembered the council chamber too, when fear had turned his protection into control and sent her searching for exits again. All of it belonged to the man before her. She would not love an invented version of him simply because the truth was easier now. "I want the man who frightened me enough to make me leave," she said. Kael flinched. And the man who released me anyway. The man who made an unforgivable choice years ago and still refuses to pretend it was clean. The man who was terrified when I went back onto those roads and let me choose anyway. She let the torn contract fall onto the table. I want the whole truth, Kael. But I want it because I choose it. He looked at her for a long moment. He did not reach for her. May I stand beside you? The feared Alpha ruler, the demon who could command soldiers with a word, was asking. Mara smiled. Yes. Kael crossed the space only then. His hand found hers, gently enough that she could release it whenever she wished. She did not. Behind Mara, the council chamber door remained open. She noticed it automatically. Perhaps she always would. Once, an open door had meant escape. Once, freedom had meant keeping enough money hidden to run before anyone could decide her life belonged to them. Now there was nothing blocking the doorway, no contract binding her to the stronghold, no alpha command holding her beside Kael. Mara looked at the open passage, then back at the man whose hand rested loosely in hers. She had come here, believing she was making a deal with a demon. The deal was gone. The door was open. Mara stayed.